Welcome to another episode of Hiring and Empowering Solutions podcast. My name is Molly McGrath, and I am the founder of this revolutionary office altering podcast. You can check us out at hiringandempowering.com. I am so excited about today's guest. Welcome, Sandie. Great to have you.
Thank you, Molly. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be visiting with you today.
Yeah. So Sandie and I have known each other for, like 20 years now, I guess it's been since I got in the estate planning industry back in 1997. And Sandie's been a 32-year probate and trust administration paralegal. She's worked in-house as well as virtually for about 5 years now, serving estate planning attorneys across the country successfully. And today we're going to be speaking about the 3 myths of probate and trust administration outsourcing, process control, and the client expectations. And I'm so excited for this, Sandie. I know we've been talking about this for years, and I'm excited for our listeners to hear all your wisdom.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's dive in and let's talk about the myths that I've heard over and over again. Probate and trust admin seem to be this, redheaded stepchild, if you will, in the law firms that I've been coaching over the past 22 years now. And so often I will hear you can't outsource it. You can't control the process. You can't control the client expectations or the financial institutions. And it's so difficult to train and onboard and process probate and trust admin. I'm sure you've heard that as well, huh?
Yes. Because there's a lot of different factors that can come into play. You can't, anticipate what a decedent may or may not have had, and so frequently you're thrown curves.
Yeah. Yeah, quite often.
Yeah.
So talk to us a little bit of how you really can turn probate and trust administration practice into what I think you and I talked about earlier, a processed profit center in their law firm. And what you have seen work successfully for people to be able to manage a process, a client expectation, because that's myth number one that I hear so often. You have no control over the process, right? That it could take anywhere from 9 months to 18 months to 12 months. Talk to us a little bit about what you have experienced of really as a seasoned experienced probate paralegal, how you can manage the process and move all the players along, such as the financial institutions and the clients.
Right. I think a lot of aiding a client in moving things along more quickly, because let's face it, you're picking up the leftovers of somebody's life and wrapping up their affairs that could be messy, they could be organized, they could be in all different forms. I think we use the term, they bring you the dresser drawer. Some of it can be 30 years old, no longer a viable asset. So communicating with the client what the goal is, because they don't know, they're not understanding what the goal is with the jobs that you're giving them when they're acting as a personal representative. So when you ask them to do something and they're not understanding why they're doing it, what the end goal is, they might lollygag or procrastinate because they're taking care of their own life also. So if we can keep them focused with bullet point action, this is what I need you to do for us. This is what I need for you to get to us so that we can move forward with determining viable assets and so on and so forth, and just keep those things moving along. And also, instead of not being reactionary to the phases, but instead preparing for it ahead of time, that's helpful in moving things along quicker and getting a probate closed in an abbreviated period of time. Those are some of the things that I've seen work. Having all flow charts, sheets, a process that's bam, 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 bam.
So as far as like that process, and what I'm hearing you say is that when you do have a written process, such as checklists, flow charts, things of that nature, I would assume that if you explain that and lay that out to the client first and foremost, maybe in that first get to know you meeting or what have you, and you can show them the beginning, the middle, the end. And you said something really critical, the why you're asking them for these pieces and why it's critical for them to make it a priority and get it to you so you can move it along. They can get their estate closed, they can get their money as well. It's not always just about getting the money. And I would assume it's kind of dotting the I's and crossing the T's because they're so
Right.
fearful of what might come after them if they're not taking care of these financial matters, right?
Right. You're right. And the whole process is geared towards getting to the elements that are required in a final petition so that the court is fully advised. This is what we did. This is how we did it. And, there's rules about how that needs to be done. And maybe somebody doesn't understand that so then they don't take it seriously and don't get it done as quickly as you may like, because you don't want it lollygagging in your office. You want to keep it moving.
Yeah. And I hear that so often from people that they feel like they have no control over it. So do you see, Sandie, that one of debunking that myth that you can't control the process, do you share the flow chart, if you will, with the client and lay out the entire journey from opening the file to closing the file with them and letting them know kind of the expectations that you have of them to meet so you can meet the deadlines and at what point you're going to need what from them so they can, people always want to be told what to do and they want expectations, and humans respond very, very well to deadlines. I always use the example to people when they say, oh, I can't get the client to do blah, 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 and I can't get anyone to adhere to deadlines. I'm like, well, yeah, BS on that, because you get your mortgage statement and it doesn't say pay whenever you want. No, that's you're going to pay that bill because there's a deadline, there's accountability, and you absolutely know there's a consequence if you do not follow through.
Right. And to address that, in the past 3 to 5 years, I've noticed that the courts, especially in I live in California, California courts they're being less and less tolerant. And they'll issue a warrant. If you don't get this done, you need to show up and explain why. And so we can use that as that, I can use that. Lots of times, and you and I have talked about what a wonderful group of people that estate planning and probate attorneys are, and where their hearts are. But sometimes your staff can be the heavy in that. If you can't get this to me, this is what could happen. The court can issue an OSC because they have a deadline. There's a deadline for you to provide this information to the court so that they can issue appropriate orders to get the matter closed. So sometimes it does come down to something like that.
And clients, in my experience, respond really well to that if they know that there's a deadline, and especially when you bring in, the court and saying, we could be issued a warrant or whatever it might be, there's heavy consequences to this. Then I find that especially working with you and many of my clients that do use your outsourced services, that the beauty of using you in outsourced services is because they're paying you, right? So they want this process to be complete so they can get the completion of it on the client end of it and get it out of their work in progress and get paid on the file as well. Number one. But number two is that when you over communicate with the client and you let them know upfront, okay, this ideally is going to be a 6-month, 9-month process, what have you. Here's where we're going to start. Here's where we're going to end. Showing them. Do you give them that flow chart? Do you share that with the client?
Yes.
Yeah.
I have several graphics that I use, and you can quickly identify a client's personality traits and their, level of care, and you just work with that in the most efficient way you can,
Yeah.
together.
Hmm.
You know.
I like that you said that. I'm thinking of like the Colby assessment where you can see if they're a high fact finder, they're a procrastinator, they're disorganized, they're hyper organized, what have you. And if you can identify that in that initial phone call, then you could kind of paint the picture and share with them, what your expectations are. And if it's not their strong suit, you can even say, I'm going to serve as your reminder for you. And I would assert that they would be really grateful for that.
Yeah. And generally I go back to the attorney that is managing the file that I'm working for, and ask them, here's what is going on. How much effort do you want me to put in? Do you want me to make them do it and, do the legwork? Or would you like for me to do that? And, they can make that choice. And then I'm not making that choice for them because, when it comes down to it, it's their billable hours.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah.
I'm sensitive about that. While the client isn't aware, they're not aware that that it may be labor intensive.
Mm-hmm. And I've heard from firms too, going back to creating a profit center, so to speak, and being able to, because sometimes they feel like just like funding that it's a revenue loser, so to speak. But do you find that firms that you work with, I know some firms that I work with, they charge a flat fee of $1,500, $2,500 to open the matter, to begin the process. And clients, what I've heard before is that clients are really grateful for that, because they're more accountable, because they already paid in, the whole statement, you got to pay to play. It's when people write a check, it seems to be their intentionality and their dedication and their focus is so much grander.
Yeah. And every attorney that I've ever worked with charges a retainer for a probate to get it started.
Oh my
Even
goodness.
even in the states, there's a handful of states that have statutory schemes, which aren't mandatory. I know that in those states, attorneys don't generally encourage each other to reduce those fees, but sometimes they do. And so that can be an option, and it can be worked out at the end how that's going to be equalized, because an executor shouldn't have to pay out of their own pocket. It's going to come off the top, but somebody's got to float it. Somebody's got to float it as you go along, and those are all things that I feel like should be discussed between the attorney and even the people that they're contracting with, and the client.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. All right, law firms, listen up. You heard it straight from Sandie Vedder that you can charge a retainer. All of her clients do. I can't tell you how many law firms I work with that they do not charge an upfront fee for opening up a probate and or a trust admin. And I get attorneys fighting with me every single day around that. So I love to hear that you do see that more. 32 years of doing this, that's the norm, not the exception.
Well, the retainer generally is for a cost retainer. And so that is what it is. They're not, shouldn't be advancing costs for their client.
Yeah. Which is interesting because this is what I hear too. How much is too much to pay a probate paralegal? I always hear attorneys that, to find an experienced probate paralegal, there's only 20,000 estate planning law firms, give or take, across the country. And so to find somebody who's experienced and seasoned in probate and trust admin is like trying to find a purple unicorn, because you think of probate and trust admin, if there are experienced, think of that, 20,000 across the country. If they are experienced, typically they don't leave a firm unless a firm breaks up, a partner moves, a partner dies, retires, things of that nature. I don't very often see that probate paralegals are moving around and that they're very valuable because it's such a finite niche specific scope, number one. Number two, I hear attorneys all the time that they don't want to pay probate paralegals. And this is, when you're not charging an upfront retainer, you do feel like you're carrying the heavy load. So it's not a revenue generator. So that's one way that you can start making it a profit center, number one. Number two, I would say that they're not charging. I can't believe how many law firms are not charging for their paralegals' time for the work that they're doing in regards to probate and trust. And it's just fascinating to me.
Well, some states don't allow that, so I think that's probably where that's coming from, and their fee has to pay for the staff that they use. In most instances, there's some things in probate where that's not true, and you can bill for the paralegal's time and your staff's time, and so that's just part of the probate process. But that's because the fee is so high in a probate,
Especially in trust admin, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what would you say to that for attorneys that don't, they're afraid to make the investment, or they're thinking they, don't want to pay, I don't know, 60, 70, 80, depending on where you're at, $1,000 a year for a dedicated probate paralegal. And then they have someone who's doing the drafting, answering the phones, doing the marketing, just handling it and not treating it like a dedicated department that requires a full-time person. That's myth number two that I do hear is we don't really need a full-time person. We can't depend on this type of work. A lot of firms don't market for it, which I think is insanity and definitely lost opportunity. What would you say about that myth that it doesn't really require a dedicated full-time person, that I should pay handsomely and what they're worth, because it can be a profit center and it does require, uninterrupted time and attention for this department?
Yeah. Well, some of the things that are helpful when you do have a dedicated person, there's one of the things that I do is I anticipate the next phase before the next phase is there. So I can, while waiting for an appointment by the court of a personal representative and the ensuing documents, putting that office in place, I'm already starting to prepare for the next phase, which is, creditor notices, notice to governmental entities, so that when that's in place, it can just shoot out the door, get that creditor claim period running, and then begin doing the other items of, marshaling and inventory and so on and so forth. And so the flow of that is more efficient. It's more efficient. And then also I can't even think of how many different forms of assets there are that a decedent may have. And having someone that's experienced and can identify those assets, can identify the particular brokerage house maybe that's at. We all know all the banks, the brokerage houses, they are their own little governments. If you're familiar with what those particular entities require, you can anticipate better how to get that asset closed out efficiently. And so all of those things, if you're not being distracted by or running around putting out fires, then it's going to get done quicker, faster, better, and then get your final orders and your distribution and your fee.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what I hear from you, if you have a dedicated person, number one, you can you can get the return on investment from the results to resource ratio. If you have a dedicated person, a lot of probate and trust admin, very much like funding or really any area, requires over communication with the client, a lot of babysitting, a lot of following up with the client, with the financial institutions, etc. So if you stay on top of it, I mean, just yesterday I was doing an audit of a law firm and they had 32 open probate and trust admin. I think couple, just a small handful were trust admin files. And there was outstanding revenue attached to them. But not only that, they haven't, so often I hear, I haven't had time to get to it. So you have these matters that are sitting there. And if you're not over communicating with the client, if you're not hand holding with them, if you're not giving them that white glove client experience, even if it's just to say, no update, just want to let you know, we filed blah, 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 we're waiting on X, Y, and Z. The next step's going to be, you know, what have you. The strategic byproducts that'll come out of that because of the experience with the client versus just treating it like, oh, you know, I had an attorney say to me recently, there's no urgency in probate and trust admin, really. You
Right.
know, they're just sitting there waiting. I'm like, baloney. The urgency can be there if somebody's driving it, if someone's facilitating it, if somebody's giving it that nature. The amount of time that's put into it and the dedication is going to really dictate the life cycle of the file. Wouldn't you agree?
Yes, yes. And some of the things that I hear you saying with those frustrations with firms and attorneys, some of the information that you're trying to dig up is it's tedious and precise. And it has to be because you're reporting to a court and to other beneficiaries those items. And you don't want anything to be vague. And some of the things that are required, say in an inventory, you know, you might have to dig up, you know, CUSIP numbers for stocks. That's not in the statements that the person's giving you. So you can shift some of that burden to the personal representative to perform that work for you if you're precise enough in your communications with them. And then it's done for you. But what happens is the client's allowed to just dump paperwork on you. And then pretty soon you have a file full of stuff. You don't know what's what, where it came from. Was it in the mail? Was it under the bed? You know, it's those kinds of things that make a staff frustrated and able to move forward because of that.
Mm-hmm.
Because you literally have to dig back into it and reorientate yourself to it and start from an unknown place. That's the frustrating. So what I've tried to do is keep that clear on a list, what I need from you. I need this from you, this bank account from this date to this date. Go get it and put it in order for me. And they will. They'll give it to me in a binder. So it makes it easier. It makes it easier and more efficient. And then you're not paying somebody to do that. And that's their job, really.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. I always say, get the box of anxiety out of the room. They're so grateful. So what I hear you is when you process things, you have your visuals, you share it with the client, then they understand where the beginning, the middle, and the end is, or understand the why of why you're asking them for what they need. If you charge them an upfront fee, they're more invested to get you the information, and they're more, they don't mind. I mean, you think about it when you have, and I like the visual of the box of anxiety, or like you said, go under the bed or dump out the junk drawer or the dresser drawer. If I could hand somebody that box of mess and write them a check to start sorting it out and communicating, it's just like your taxes. My favorite check to write is to my CPA. I don't want to do that myself. So I don't ever question writing that check. I don't ever question that fee and giving it to them, because that is the last thing that I want to do. Same with my bookkeeper that I pay every single month. Every single month that she sends me my invoice, my my automatic response to her every time is approved, and you are my favorite check to write every single month. So attorneys, you really need to shift your mindset around a few things that I'm hearing from Sandie. Is number one, collecting an upfront retainer. If you can, if you're able to bill for your paralegal's time for it, is absolutely customary, if you know, based on your state. Number three is you can process and systematize it and share that with your clients. I would assert, Sandie, that you sharing those visuals and those flow charts and the checklist and the part of the process of where we're going and where we're ended, you know, where we're starting and where we're ending, really helps to facilitate that process and keep it moving, right?
Yes. And, you know, with as little attorney time and involvement as possible. And if you have an experienced staff member, they're going to know when to bother you and when not to bother you. And you can make the legal decisions when they need to be made, when you're presented with. And the other stuff is just collecting assets and managing the movement of things. And then in the end, the final petition, and bam, it's done. It can be done in 9 months. It can be done sometimes even shorter than that, depending on what the assets are. And if something tends to blow up, sometimes things take longer for various reasons. Maybe something was discovered right before you were ready to close, and things like that happen. And you're not stuck because there's petitions available to the court to get a partial fee. So there's always options if you have somebody that's experienced and knowledgeable enough to make it fit for whatever your needs are and your firm's needs.
Yeah. Experienced, knowledgeable enough. And then I would also say that they have the dedication of time. You can have an experienced and knowledgeable person, but if they don't have the dedicated time to put towards this. So I really want to encourage, after speaking with Sandie today, encourage you attorneys to get a dedicated person to focus on this, because the volume of work is number one, and being able to move the files quicker through the process. But then it also gives you the faith and the confidence to be able to market. I had an attorney tell me this week, like, you don't even have Probate or Trust Administration on your website. Why? And they're like, I just don't have the faith that we can handle the work in the office. And it's because they don't, I mean, like, if you had a process, if you had a dedicated person, then would you? And they're like, absolutely. And I think that's the reason that people hold back on that. So if you can get a dedicated person, it also gives you the faith and the confidence to communicate and to market. I have many firms that do direct targeted marketing for just probate and trust admin. They do dedicated workshops in regards to that, and it's helped them to really blow up their practice from that perspective. Because they had the confidence that they had the dedicated person in the process. So you have to begin with the end of the mind and build it, and they will come, right?
Yes, I completely agree with that. Yes. Yeah, you're not going to get to a place of confidence until you step over the ledge.
Yeah.
And believe, and believe that, it's going to move forward in an efficient way.
So talk to us about the final myth that you've been outsourcing and you've been serving as back office paralegal and paralegal for probate and trust admin for firms for 5 years now. Talk to us about the myth that you can't outsource the probate and trust admin, and how you have been able to successfully do that for so many law firms.
You mean can't outsource? Is it outsource it in the sense of it's not practical to do that?
Yeah, like how to. They feel like it's such a confusing area of law. And in my experience, it's because the attorney's they don't have a process, so they're not confident in it. And they're just worried about the sea of paperwork because of all the financial institutions and because it's typically very state specific.
Yeah. So, with the various firms that I've worked with, each firm likes to manage that in a different way. And I don't have a problem with that. I don't know how other contract paralegals may or may not do it. So some set up remote links for me to get into their system, give me free access to their system. Others just email me stuff. And if it's not what I need, I just let them know, hey, can someone send me, this or that, or the other, or I'll call the client and get it from them. One of the things that I didn't expect with setting this up was the amount of contact with the clients that I've had. And that's kind of been fun for me, because if I need something and I'm not getting it from the office, and now this is all with full authority from the office,
Sure.
I give them my cell phone number, and so we have a little rapport. They'll call me on the weekends. I'm trying to dig this up. Is this what you need? And they'll email it to me, and so we can kind of work that way. The best way is remoting in, because then I have full access of everything, and then the it's in the attorney's file. I usually have a dedicated email for that firm, so the communications that their clients are getting from me and that the courts are getting from me all are taglined with their .com, and so that has a nice presentation. Other firms, I just do the drafting and email it to them, and their secretarial staff finishes off the rest. That's probably the most monetarily efficient way, because then I'm just doing the actual legal analysis and drafting.
Okay. So in regards to outsourcing, what I'm hearing from you is it could be old school way of emailing back and forth the documents, or you have a remote VPN login where you can go into the server and get the documentation from them. And I love that you do the client communication, because I would assert that's the biggest area that is a time thievery for the law firm. Is that the client communication. And so having a dedicated person that can, so there's no reason that law firms can't outsource. And I would assert by outsourcing it to you and having to pay your fees, so to speak, will hold them accountable, very much like the client writing an upfront check, but hold them accountable to get the work over to you, to get you the documents. So often that heart attack or anxiety shoebox will sit in the corner of somebody's office, and we don't dig into it because we're so overwhelmed with what's in there and how much time it will be and what to do with the statements and everything once we start digging into it, right?
Yes.
So what would you say are, in closing, what would you say, Sandie, is the biggest piece of advice that you would give to law firms in regards to leaping, as you said, just take the leap of belief in regards to treating their probate and or trust admin department like a department in the law firm, and stop treating it like a stepchild and or a headache. A lot of times people say, oh, it's the biggest pain in our law firm. And my experience is because they don't have a system or a process or anyone who's excited about running that.
Well, yeah, and I don't even understand that argument or that concept at all, because I feel like it's such a clear and concise process that you're required to go through, and just following those procedures and those steps and those flow charts to keep the clients moving. It's almost, to me, flabbergasting that you would say no to it. Mm-hmm. And the trust administration too. I actually enjoy probates more than I do trust administrations, but the trust administrations are even less laborsome than probates. And I think probably what people struggle with is not knowing what that decedent had and didn't have, and the time it takes to figure that out. If you can get someone that can quickly identify whether an asset is viable or not, or even what it is, what's an H series bond, or what is this note? What do I do with this note? Is it an old note? Is it a new note? And just the time sometimes it takes to figure those things out. I could see those being deterrents, but if you have somebody that's seen all of those things over decades, then that's not going to be an issue.
Yeah, I love that. I would agree with that. If you have somebody who understands the terms of art, understands the language, they understand what it means in regards to the different documents, how they operate, how the financial institutions operate, etc., then
Yeah.
you don't avoid it. You're not overwhelmed by it. You're excited to dive in. And it's interesting to hear you say that trust admin is less labor intensive because that typically has a bigger profit, the bigger payday, the bigger payout. And that's really exciting to hear you say that. So that should be encouraging for law firms on on its own.
Yes. Yeah. Some of the problems with that, are the claim forms and so on and so forth. And each brokerage house some are more frustrating than others. And if you're aware of that, you just head it off at the path with your experience and your knowledge. What do I know about what Fidelity needs from me? Can I get it on their website? Can I make the client call and sit on hold with customer service and those kinds of things, Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know why you wouldn't take them.
Yeah. Why you wouldn't take those types of cases?
Those types of cases, yeah. And even if it meant that you had to plan for that kickoff of, like you mentioned, just someone not having that on their website. Presumably because they don't want to draw that to them. If it comes to them, fine, but they don't want to draw that to them because they don't want it to blow up in their face. So if you could even prepare for that with set aside some capital to finance the beginnings of that and just go, and then the payoff at the end, I think, is worth it.
It is very worth it.
And it's really gratifying to help people that are in that place. You and I talked about helping people in their grief and discomfort, and they're overwhelmed, and they've got siblings that are griping at them because they want their money, and all those factors. And getting through that with someone that can make a lifelong client and friend.
And walking ambassador for your law firm, thank you for saying that, because I think that's the biggest reason why you want a dedicated person, because as you and I have talked about several times, it's like you're a safe place for the client to land when you're allowing them to deal with their grief. They have so much else to deal with, and to take this level of pain and confusion and overwhelm away from them, they're happy to pay the fee, number one. But number two, I would assert that they'll consistently come to you when they're feeling overwhelmed, or when you are calling them and checking in with them and getting information from them. You're able to lend a compassionate ear. You're able to lend, a way to even lessen their grief by 1%, versus if you have somebody who's doing it in between 10 other things, they're not going to have the patience. They're not going to have the compassion or the empathy to really extend that time, even if it's 5 minutes, for the client to just chitter chatter, or the client to just share. When you say, how are you doing, and checking in with them, that could be a 10-minute conversation. If you have somebody who's doing drafting and funding, or if you as the attorney in between client meetings, you're communicating with the client, you're not going to be communicating energetically your compassion and empathy for the client, which in essence is why they will pay you all day long.
Yeah. They can sense that you feel like you may be being bothered.
Yeah. That's
if you're not in that, place.
Yes, even more reason to get it off your desk, attorneys, if you're still doing this, because it doesn't require the attorney. This can be handled by a paralegal, paraprofessional, absolutely. A dedicated one who knows the terms of arts to really streamline the process and be able to communicate with the client what to expect throughout the entire journey, so you can meet your deadlines.
Exactly.
Oh, Sandie, thank you. Thank you so much for being our guest today. I'm going to go ahead in the show notes is exactly how you can get in contact with Sandie. So if somebody's interested in outsource services, what have you, what's your process, Sandie? Would they just email you and schedule a call to hear more about your process?
Yes, it would just, reach out by email is the best way.
Okay.
And we can schedule
Excellent.
something.
Oh, great. All right. Well, thank you for your time today. And again, you'll have Sandie's contact information in the show notes. And thank you for being with us, Sandie. It was an absolute pleasure.
Thank you, Molly. Have a good
Okay.
day.
You too.
Bye.
Okay. So this is another episode of Hiring and Empowering Solutions podcast. And until next time, have a great day.
Have a great day.